Hey everybody, today I want to talk about the Beatles' 1965 album, Rubber Soul. It is obviously one of the best albums ever released by anybody, and it may even be the best album released by the Beatles, but I'm not going to be the one to say that because I love them all. So, I want to specifically talk about this pressing of Rubber Soul, which has just been listed on needlemeetsvinyl.com. This is an absolute game changer. This is the best version of Rubber Soul I've ever heard. This is a UK pressing. This is from 1973, and it has a very important etching in the dead wax on side one. It says HTM, and this just sounds absolutely amazing. And the clarity on this is what's the best part about it, because you can hear so many things in this that you cannot hear in other pressings. And I will show you a couple of other pressings that I have that I used to decide that this was the best one. In addition, the drums and the bass on this sound so good. It's just got an extra punch to it that the other copies of Rubber Soul just don't seem to have. And I gotta say, this one was a big surprise for me and was really fun to listen to because it's so good. But let me show you some of the other Rubber Souls that I have. And by the way, I should mention that I'm sure a lot of you know this already, but Rubber Soul, obviously there's a mono and a stereo mix of Rubber Soul. But for the purpose of my website, I'm going to go with the stereo mix just because I prefer the stereo mix over the mono mix, although I love the mono mix as well. I think the mono mix and the stereo mix should be considered their own thing. Like, everyone should own a mono mix, everyone should also own a stereo mix. But let's talk about the stereo mix, because there are two stereo mixes available for Rubber Soul. There's the original 1965 stereo mix, which is what this is. But then there's also the 1987 mix of Rubber Soul that is featured on later pressings. For example, this is the 2012 stereo remaster, which features the 1987 George Martin remix of Rubber Soul. Now, what happened, obviously, in 1987, or maybe not obviously, maybe you don't know this, but in 1987, when the Beatles were going to release their albums for the first time on CD, George Martin, when he listened to the stereo masters of Help and Rubber Soul, he was really not happy with how the stereo mixes sounded. So he went and remixed Help and Rubber Soul. So those two albums have a 1987 stereo mix that is different than the 1965 original stereo mixes. I personally prefer the 1965 stereo mix. Granted, I grew up with the 1987 stereo mix, and so that's the one I'm more familiar with. But when it comes to listening, I really prefer the 1965 stereo mix. And that is what is on this pressing, this 1973 Parlophone UK pressing that's on the website right now, needlemeetsvinyl.com. And if you want to pick this one up, I recommend going to the website right now because, as I always say, and it's becoming like a broken record, but it's just the truth, anytime I list anything that has to do with the Beatles on my website, it goes very quickly. And I've received more than one emails from people asking me, oh, did that record already sell? Or do you have another one? Or how soon will you have another one on the website? So it's really important, if you want to get your hands on this, head on over there right now and see if it's still available, because it's going to go quickly. So this is the 1973 UK pressing of the album, and it is absolutely amazing. But then I also have, and we just talked about this one, this is a 1969 UK pressing of Rubber Soul, and this one is actually a pretty sought after pressing of Rubber Soul. This has just the single box, EMI box on this label, and these are known to have very good sound, and it does have really good sound, I have to admit. But this 1973 pressing that I just showed you it really beats this one by quite a lot. This one is a little bit louder, I will admit. The overall mastering is louder, but the overall sonic clarity and just the excellence of the bass and the high end, the 73 pressing just beats this one by a lot, to be honest with you. But this one does sound very good, and it is very loud, which is kind of cool. So this is a 1969 UK pressing. Then I have, this is a Japanese pressing of Rubber Soul. And this one, unfortunately, there's a little bit of distortion going on with this pressing, kind of like the Revolver that I have that's also a Japanese pressing. There's a little bit of distortion going on. This does sound pretty good, though, I have to say. So if you ever find one of these, it's worth picking up. This is on the Apple label. That comes with this cool black inner sleeve. But that's the label on this one. And again, it sounds good, but there is a bit of distortion. And it's not from the record. It's from the actual mastering that they did when they were pressing this record. And it's actually kind of a pretty common problem with a lot of those Japanese pressings. And then, as I showed earlier, this is the remaster from 2012 they released. And this one sounds good as well. If you want to just pick up a really good sounding copy of Rubber Soul and you don't want to spend too much money, you can get this one for under $30. You can probably get it for like $20, to be honest with you. And this is it's a solid sounding record, but it in no way does it compare to this pressing from 1973. This one is just an excellent sounding Rubber Soul, and it will absolutely blow your mind. So head on over to needlemeetsvinyl.com. I did a whole write-up on this if you want to know some more information about this specific pressing and more about the process of how I decided that this was the best one. Head on over there. And I'm sure some of you are probably wondering, well, how come he's not showing any original Parlophone black and yellow label pressings of Rubber Soul? Well, the truth is I don't actually own a copy of that. I wish I did, but they are so expensive, and finding a clean one is really impossible. And if you did find a clean one, it would probably cost you somewhere around $400-$500. And I have a friend that has a copy, a stereo copy that is clean, and I have listened to it actually on my own system. And while it sounds really, really good, I think this pressing is actually comparable to it. It's at least very, very close. And obviously, for the money, this is such a better value because those Parlophone original pressings just go for a whole lot of money. And if you can get your hands on one, then good for you. But as far as my website goes, I'm trying to keep the prices semi-reasonable. That's why I decided to go with these 1969 being the earliest pressing that I would get my hands on. But this is an excellent sounding Rubber Soul. In fact, I will go on record and say that this is the best Rubber Soul you will ever hear, unless you have an original UK black and yellow Parlophone label Rubber Soul from 1965, which if you do, good on you. But if you don't, here's what you need, because this is absolutely fantastic. So head on over, needlemeetsvinyl.com, and please, in the comments below, let me know some of your thoughts on Rubber Soul. Obviously, it's just one of the best albums of all time, one of the best Beatles albums of all time. I mean, this album had such an impact that Brian Wilson of the Beach Boys, when he heard the US version of Rubber Soul, it made him want to go and create an amazing... Oh, here's Bobby making an appearance. Even Bobby likes Rubber Soul, by the way. Oh, he's out here. But yeah, Brian Wilson, when he heard the US version of Rubber Soul, it inspired him so much that that's how he went on to go and make the Beach Boys' Pet Sounds album. So Rubber Soul is just a very, very important album in the history of music. And on top of that, I believe George Harrison has said that Rubber Soul was his favorite Beatles album. So that means something as well. So yeah, in the comments below, give me some of your personal recollections of Rubber Soul. When's the first time you heard Rubber Soul? Did you hear it on record, on CD, on tape, on 8-track, on reel-to-reel? I'd be very curious to know. For me, first time I heard Rubber Soul, I heard the U.S. version it was the Capitol Records Rainbow label. It was my dad's copy, and I loved it, obviously. But then when I heard the UK version, not too long after that, I heard that on CD, and I remember thinking like, wow, there's a lot of different songs on this UK version, because obviously, as we know, the UK version is the version the Beatles put out, and then the US version, Capitol Records took some songs off, like they took off Drive My Car, they took off What Goes On, and then they included some songs from Help. Like I think they put on I've Just Seen a Face from Help. That's the first song on the US Rubber Soul. They also included It's Only Love. So the US Rubber Soul and the UK Rubber Soul are very, very different. But personally, for my own taste, I like the UK version Rubber Soul the most. But I also have a special place in my heart for the US version. It's just a different beast altogether. Anyway, those are some of my thoughts on the Beatles' Rubber Soul album. So head on over, needlemeetsvinyl.com, and check out this copy of Rubber Soul. And we'll talk to you all very soon. Okay, bye for now.